There's been a lot of talk about a possible COVID vaccine recently, but who would actually be first in line to get this vaccine? A local specialist tells us about who is recommended to take the vaccine before anyone else.
The first in line will be healthcare workers or first in line, those who are exposed to positive COVID cases on a daily basis.
Second in line will be those with underlying conditions or those at a higher risk of complications, such as those with heart or lung problems, as well as those with diabetes or cancer.